how's this reception for the video and audio and stuff?
You're pretty pixelated and you're breaking up with the video, but we'll do the best we can. Can you hear us okay?
Yeah, I can hear you good.
Right on. Tell us where you're at right now, William, and what are you up to?
I'm in Tenerife, in the Canary Islands in Spain, and just started training again. This is kind of my base training season, so I'm just doing a lot of pool and gym training and yoga, just building up a good base when I go back to the Bahamas and do depth training.
Okay, so before we get started, I introduced you prior to the phone conversation with some of your achievements. Can you tell us what is apnea?
Apnea basically just means holding your breath. So it comes from a Greek word without air, and apnea or freediving is sports where you go distance or depth on a single breath of air. And in my training, I'm mostly kind of targeting the depth disciplines and trying to get as deep as possible with or without fins.
Okay, so, and I've also learned from my research that there are two different, let's say, governing bodies for freediving competition. There is the AIDA as well as the CMAS.
Yeah, the CMAS is kind of the official one that's ratified by, I don't know, the IOC, which is like the world body of sports. But to be honest with you, they don't really do anything. And most of the athletes, pretty much all the athletes that actually who are any good in freediving dive for AIDA. And all world records are a lot deeper, obviously, in AIDA.
Also through my research, I understand that AIDA kind of sanctions 5 disciplines. Or hey, could you explain them for me? That's probably a better idea.
The depth disciplines are constant weight, and that's with or without fins. So there's constant weight with fins, and most people use a monofin these days, that big kind of whale tail. Constant weight without fins, which is kind of the purest form because you're just swimming down with your hands and feet. And then the third one is free immersion, where you're allowed to pull on the rope to go down and up. It's kind of like underwater rope climbing. So those are the 3 depth disciplines. And in the pool, there's dynamic apnea, and that's again with and without fins, so two different disciplines. And then static apnea. So there's 6 disciplines overall, 3 in the pool, 3 in depth.
Okay, and on the internet, I read that there were also 2 depth disciplines: variable weight apnea, where you use a weighted sled for descent, that's sanctioned by AIDA, as well as a no limits apnea, which is you can use any means to descend and resurface.
Yeah, so those are both the sled disciplines, where you go down with a weighted sled and come up either under your own steam, or in no limits you can come up with like a balloon, lift bag, whatever. And historically, those were kind of the most important disciplines. Like back in the day, there's a movie, The Big Blue, that came out, and they're all diving no limits and that. But we're seeing a move more towards the kind of athletic disciplines. Those are more kind of perceived as stunts. You pretty much have to hold on to the sled and equalize. And if you can do that, then you can get to any kind of depth.
You know, we've heard some news about Herbert Nitsch. He dove to 244 meters. He released a press release that, and I quote, "Data collected from 5 instruments confirmed that Herbert did reach the planned depth of 244 meters. Undeniably, he is the deepest free diver on Earth." And then that followed up with that. "He has been taken out of intensive care and is under constant monitoring. Interviews cannot be considered until further notice." And you know, we sure hope Herbert has a full and complete recovery. But you know, can you comment a little bit about that?
I mean, no one really knows exactly what happened, what problems he had at the end of the dive, or whether it could be considered like a world record. It definitely won't be sanctioned by anybody because he didn't invite the AIDA judges to come and officiate the dive. But some people are saying he might have been, it's unclear whether he was helped to the surface by his safety divers or what exactly happened. But But we're seeing kind of, especially with those two disciplines, in recent years, there have been numerous incidents. There's been, I think, 4 deaths and 10 serious incidents like this one in the last 10, 15 years. And that's when there's only really a handful of people who are actually diving in the discipline. And if you compare that to the other sport, the other disciplines, there's been no deaths or serious incidents in competitions for all those other disciplines I mentioned. And there's literally thousands of people competing in them. And it's kind of giving freediving a little bit of a reputation of being like this kind of death wish sport, which it really isn't. It can be a very safe and beautiful sport. Obviously, there's always going to be an element of risk, but almost all of that risk is in those sled diving stunt disciplines.
You know, you touched on it earlier. What are some of the differences between simply taking a deep breath and going down in a sled, which certainly it's a lot more than that. There's the pressure, there's everything like that, compared to what you do where you're swimming down?
With sled diving, you're going to a much deeper depth. So the equalizing, getting air into your ears is going to be a lot more difficult. But that's pretty much the only, the main actual physical thing that's difficult. Creating a sled and making it go fast and having efficient safety, that's all really complicated, but it's a technical part to the discipline. Whereas with the other disciplines where you're self-powered, it's all comes down to the athlete. You have to be efficient in the way that you move through the water. You have to be able to tolerate very high lactic acid and carbon dioxide and tolerate low oxygen. Be able to still keep swimming efficiently when your kind of mind is a little sketchy from the narcosis that you get at those depths.
My question is like, what's going on in your mind when you're actually going down there?
Hopefully as little as possible. Thoughts themselves are composed of brain waves, and the more that you're thinking, the more energy that's required to make those, and that energy has to come from oxygen. So it taps into the small store that you have in your lungs and in your blood. Even before the dive starts, I try and slow my thoughts down, but definitely during the dive, I try just to kind of concentrate on the spaces between the thoughts, and not try and kind of actively push the thoughts out of my mind, but just like lengthen those empty spaces, and that helps. So this was a recent world record attempt with fins. Normally I specialize without fins, but here I was doing a dive with the monofin.
And there it shows the breathing. Can you talk about the breathing, the preparation you take in the breathing?
My breathing beforehand is just as relaxed as possible, and in the last breath, after I finish inhaling it, I use my mouth to force more air into my lungs.
And can you talk a little bit about your technique when you're diving down?
Yeah, you use like an undulating movement, mostly the core muscles and also the legs, to send a wave down from your pelvis, down your legs into the fin, and that propels you downwards. And then once I reach that depth of around about 100 feet, 30 meters, my lungs are compressed and I lose buoyancy and I can just free fall. So most of the descent is just free fall to the ground.
And so at that point you're just totally relaxing, trying to clear your mind. Can you?
Yeah. And just I'm using kind of very small movements to check my position next to the line and make sure that I stay vertical and streamlined. But otherwise I'm just kind of trying to focus on the idea of shutting everything down, shutting the mind down, shutting the body down.
And from 30 meters where you start that free fall, how many minutes or seconds or minutes does it take to get to down to your objective, to your goal?
The whole descent is just over 2 minutes.
Okay.
And about a minute and a half of that is in free.
And you point out that the rope glows in the dark because it's totally dark.
Yeah, it's a glow rope that's sold, and it takes like a few seconds in the sun and then it will be glowing for a while after that. So it's perfect for this kind of application.
And kind of like what Andreas was talking about, Can you talk about kind of what's going through your mind here as you're heading back up?
Yeah, the ascent is a lot more difficult because I have to work against that negative buoyancy to get back. And I'm only using one set of muscles for the whole way up, so by the end of it, they're burning. They're not able to offload lactic acid or carbon dioxide. And so at this point here, my muscles are screaming out. I'm just trying to maintain my technique, my form. I'm getting like spontaneous breathing contractions from the high CO2 and low oxygen, which are trying to kind of force air in. It also doesn't come in, your mouth stays shut. Yeah, just trying to kind of stay focused and calm and stick with it the rest of the way.
You mentioned here about the surface protocol. Let's go back to that in a minute to talk about the surface protocol. The world record's 124 meters. You attempted 125 meters.
Yeah, a couple of days after this, I attempted it, and it was an okay dive, but on the surface, maybe I was just a little close to my limit, and I forgot to take my goggles off, which is part of the protocol you've got to do.
Tell us about more about the protocol.
Yeah, you've got 15 seconds for the surface protocol from the moment that you break the surface, and you have to take off any facial equipment like goggles, nose clip, mask. You have to make the OK sign and say I am OK to the judges within 15 seconds. And normally it's not a problem. Sometimes when you're kind of close to the limit, then you can mix up the water or miss something out. But it's kind of there for that purpose to distinguish between those who are completely lucid and conscious and those who maybe have gone a little bit too far.
And how long can you hold your breath?
If I'm just in static apnea, where we're just floating on the surface of the pool, I can last 8 minutes.
I just want to say everybody should stop right now, put your player on pause, and see how long you can hold your breath for. I think most people, if they get to a minute and a half, that's pretty good for the average person. Is that right?
I mean, yeah, but there's techniques that we can teach people who are fit and healthy to, even on their first attempts, the first day of training, we have people who can get to like 3 or 4 minutes. So that learning curve at the start is mostly technique, just getting relaxed, using the right kind of breathing, and just recognizing that when you feel that urge to breathe, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're running out of oxygen in that moment. Often you've got a lot of time after that.
I wonder if it could be a good idea to learn it for high altitude climbing too.
Yeah. Hold your breath for 3 or 4 days.
There are similarities in the way that your body, your physiology adapts. So freedivers get like a higher hemoglobin count, just like people who spend a lot of time at altitude. And there's some freedivers in the past who've used like oxygen tents and trained at altitude in order to try and get that adaptation.
Okay.
What do you feel are the rewards like from freediving? What does it give you?
For me, it's just a beautiful way to experience the underwater world because you're there completely not as like a tourist, but as someone as kind of equal with the underwater fish and mammals and everything else. And you've got a lot more freedom to move around and to be quiet underneath the water. But as well as that, the sensation of being in liquid and being completely suspended is something so different to what we experience in our day-to-day lives when we kind of inhabit the air element almost all the time. So being immersed in liquid, it takes away to a certain extent the different dimensions of space, because there's not really as much up, down, or to the side. It's all a little bit equalized. And as well as that, the sensation of time, as we talked about, kind of diminishes as well, especially because you don't have that rhythm of your breathing to measure the time for you.
You know, I get scared when I get down when it gets really dark and cold underwater. Do you ever worry about sea creatures creeping up on you and while you're on these underwater dives, deep free dives?
I mean, I've had some like little incidents where you'll kind of feel like a tingle run up your spine, and you'll turn around and there'll be like a barracuda or a shark or something. But in that environment, there's not really any predators who are going to think of you as prey. Even if there are reef sharks or other sharks swimming around, they don't recognize in you the idea of food, basically, and there's no other organisms under there that are inherently dangerous.
It mentions in the video there that you are down to 13 atmospheres and are experiencing 192 psi of pressure on your body. What does that feel like?
You feel the pressure where you have air spaces, so in your lungs and in your ears. And if you haven't equalized them, or if you don't have the flexibility in your lungs, then that pressure will feel like you're about to kind of implode. And so it's really important through the yoga and stretching and lung stretching to develop that flexibility so that your lungs can just kind of naturally accommodate that pressure at depth. And as well as that, there's these physiological responses where it's called the mammalian dive reflex, and it involves the lungs, or the curves in the lungs, swelling up with blood to take over that lost space. So all your blood is kind of shunted from your periphery, your limbs, into your core, into your heart and your lungs, in order to compensate for that lost space, but also in order to save the oxygen for your heart and for your brain, because your muscles, your arms and legs can carry on working anaerobically without oxygen for like minutes, but your brain can't survive even seconds without oxygen.
Wow. You know, another question, it's the same question we have around here a lot, here in Chamonix. Why the mono?
And as opposed to the bifins, or as opposed to no fins?
Right, as opposed to two fins.
It's just more efficient for propulsion.
And other than drowning, what are some of the dangers that, and eaten by a shark, what are some of the dangers that you face?
Freediving is actually a lot safer than it sounds. The most important thing is to train with a buddy who knows what they're doing and has been trained themselves with emergency procedures and safety techniques. So if you both know the drills and the techniques, and you're staying focused on each other while you're training, then it can be perfectly safe. But if you're out there diving alone, any kind of hiccup incident, and it's a fatality immediately.
You know, all this makes me want to find a good training academy. I'm wondering if you got one that you can recommend for me.
Yeah, well, we teach courses several times a year in the Bahamas, in Deansville, or where we dive.
You go to Bahamas.
I'm an apnea academy instructor, and that's probably one of the more prestigious schools for teaching freediving.
Our assistant producer, Jules, found out that you were the first non-Italian instructor.
I did the instructor's course with the Apnea Academy in Italian, because I spoke Italian at the time, and at that time there hadn't been an international or English-speaking instructor's course, so I guess I was the first native English speaker as an Apnea Academy instructor.
Okay, hit me quickly with the website address for your academy.
It's verticalblue.net.
Verticalblue.net, great. And I've got one last question from Facebook, from one of our Facebook fans for you.
Okay.
Steve from Chamonix asks, when people say in reply to an unlikely event happening, don't hold your breath, do you do it anyway?
No, No, I mean, I don't do that much in training, and if I did, like, I can only go every 5 minutes, so I might be waiting as well.
William, thanks so much for your insight into this amazing sport, and appreciate your time.
Cool.
Best of luck in the upcoming season.
Cheers, thanks a lot.
Thank you, Will.